Welcome to the beginning of a new journey. We tackled Revelation as the second most misunderstood in the Hebrew Christian library. We tackled the first 11 chapters of Genesis as the most misunderstood section in the library. Now we're tackling Paul, the most controversial author in the Christian library. Paul is controversial because most of his writings were to address problems in churches in Asia Minor. He addressed these problems as a Jewish follower of Jesus. He was steeped in the tradition of Hebrew law. He discovered love on the road to Damascus, and from that time on lived with one foot in the law and the other foot in love, and addressed problems from both perspectives. So we have 1 Corinthians 13, the clearest description of agape love revealed in Jesus' life and teachings. You can't find any better description than 1 Corinthians 13. And then we also have Paul saying to the church at Corinth, women are the glory of man, straight out of the law. 30 years ago, I was blessed to be a part of, I tried to lead, but I really failed in my leadership, a Bible study of Paul's writings included in our library. We decided to study Paul's writings chronologically, and the group was made up of some people that really disliked Paul. Now, the order of Paul's writings can be discovered in the last half of the book of the Acts of the Apostles, as it describes Paul's journeys. So he would go to a church and then later write a letter to that church addressing problems and issues. And so he wrote these letters out of both sides of his life, the law and love. However, increasingly he leaned more and more on the side of love as you study the books chronologically. The letter to the church in Rome was different. Towards the end of his life, he decided he had to go to Rome, and he wrote a letter to the church at Rome, not to address problems in the church at Rome, rather to introduce himself and share his understanding of what it meant to follow Jesus before he got there. Now, from this experience of that Bible study, I learned that Paul is much less controversial when we consider all of Paul's writings through the lens of the letter to the Romans, rather than reading his letters in isolation, many times sort of out of context, if you will. But this still doesn't deal with the controversial nature of Paul, in that many of his letters are in direct conflict to Jesus' life and teachings. That's the reason why Paul isn't liked by a lot of people. Again, timing is important. Paul wrote his letters roughly in the decade between 50 and 60 AD, 30 years after Jesus' death, but before the narratives about Jesus' life were ever written. Mark, Matthew, and Luke, none of these were read by Paul. He had experienced love on the road to Damascus, and the early church that taught Paul that Jesus revealed the love of God. They had the oral tradition of his life, death, and resurrection. And Paul became convinced and convicted that God's nature was love. This love was revealed in Jesus, but he was also blind and ignorant of the comprehensive narratives of Jesus' life that were written later. One way of understanding Paul, I think, is that Paul was post-Jesus, but pre-Christian. For the Christian movement becoming separate from the Jewish tradition came really after Paul's death. However, it can also be asserted that Christianity, defined as those who follow Jesus, independent from the Jewish tradition, might never have happened without Paul's letter to the Romans. Without Paul's letter to the Romans, Jesus might have been considered as one more great rabbi whose wisdom was heralded but not followed as the incarnate God, God in flesh. That's how influential Paul was and is today. You see, the book of Romans deals with the question for every age and every generation. Do we live in faith by the law or by grace? A question for every age and every generation. Paul's letter to Rome is a resounding proclamation as followers of Jesus. We live in love by grace, not the law. You see, and in so doing, Paul firmly stood in the tradition of the cornerstones that we've discovered in the campfire stories. He stood in the tradition of the prophets. Think of Hosea purchasing his wife, who was unfaithful, purchasing her at the marketplace of prostitutes. Love, not law. In the tradition of Jesus, who confronted by those who had the legal right to stone the woman taken in adultery. Jesus taught love, not law. And Paul not only stood in the tradition of the cornerstone and the prophets and Jesus, but also offered the foundation to Martin Luther, who stood in the tradition of the 1,000-year growth of the Roman Catholic Church, where law increasingly prevailed over love. And Luther was captured by Paul's letter to Rome and nailed his 95 Theses on the door of a church building. Love, not law. And a man named John Wesley lived early in his life according to the law as a priest in the Church of England. But he was captured by Paul's letter to Rome and started the Methodist movement, choosing love over law. Paul was crucial and is crucial today. For Paul, in his letter to the church in Rome, addressed the question for every age, every generation, every community of faith. Every person of faith must answer, will I live in love by the law or by grace? See, Paul, who lived with a foot in the law and a foot in grace, came down clearly in his last written message. His answer is clear. Those who follow Jesus live in love by grace. In our study of these this letter in the next weeks ahead, we'll be unpacking what his answer means for the disciples of Jesus then and now. So with this introduction to Paul, I'll raise some questions that you might consider in your own thinking and discuss on Sunday morning. First of all, in your own journey of faith, do you find yourself living by law or by grace? Secondly, in your journey in the community of faith called the church, do you find the practice of faith primarily by the law or grace? And thirdly, law offers certainty and security. What is the offering of grace? Enjoy your journey. Thank you.